Her forgotten ring, a simple request, and an unlikely encounter in a luxury store. What seemed like despair was actually the beginning of something that would change everything, even the fate of a dynasty. Emily Anderson walked with hurried steps along the uneven sidewalk of Fifth Avenue. The contrast between the gleaming storefronts of luxury shops and her faded clothes was striking. In her arms, she carried little Ryan, her 3-month-old son, wrapped in a thin blanket that couldn't hide the exhaustion etched on her face. The boy whimpered weakly, as if even his strength was fading. "Just a little longer, my love," she whispered, adjusting the baby against her chest. "Mommy will fix everything." The weight of the lie made her swallow hard. How could she promise something she wasn't sure of? For 3 days, Ryan's only nourishment had been sugar water. The rent for her small room in the back of a house in Riverside Heights was overdue, and the landlady had already warned she wouldn't wait any longer. Since the company where she worked as a secretary suddenly closed, Emily had tried everything: cleaning houses, handing out flyers, even selling candy at traffic lights. But with a small baby, each opportunity became an almost impossible challenge. That morning, after another sleepless night with Ryan crying from hunger, she made a desperate decision. She took the only valuable thing she owned, an old ring that had belonged to her grandmother, Celeste, and headed toward the Upper East Side, where the most important jewelers in the city were located. It was a delicate piece, seemingly simple, with a greenish stone in the center and a band slightly worn by time. Emily knew almost nothing about its origin. She only remembered her grandmother saying that the ring was special and that one day it could change her life. "You're a special girl, Emily," Celeste would say while placing the ring on her granddaughter's finger. "Just like this jewel. It's not what it appears to be at first glance. Keep it safe. One day it might change your life." Words she had always interpreted as grandmotherly affection, nothing more. She had kept the ring for years, as a memento, until the moment came when there was no alternative. Emily stopped in front of the mirrored glass facade of one of the most sophisticated jewelry stores in the city. The store's name glittered in golden letters above the entrance: Davis and Vanderbilt, Jewelry and Art. Her feet hesitated, as if they knew that environment wasn't made for her. But Ryan needed milk, and desperation didn't allow for doubt. She took a deep breath and pushed the glass door, feeling cool, perfumed air envelop her senses as she entered. The ambient music was soft, contrasting with the discreet bustle of attendants wearing impeccable suits. A security guard, positioned discreetly near the entrance, looked at her with puzzlement. Other customers, women with designer handbags and men in expensive suits, also cast questioning glances. Emily felt both invisible and exposed at the same time. "May I help you?" asked a blonde attendant, impeccably dressed, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'd like to sell this," Emily replied, taking the small ring wrapped in a worn handkerchief from her pocket. The attendant looked at the baby in Emily's arms, then at her simple clothes, and finally at the ring she was extending with trembling hands. Her smile faltered for a moment. "Unfortunately, we don't buy used jewelry. Perhaps a pawn shop," she began to say, but was interrupted. "Megan, is there a problem?" The deep voice came from a tall man with a serious expression and controlled gestures who was approaching the counter. "Mr. Davis, this lady wants to sell a ring," the attendant explained, in a tone suggesting the situation was an inconvenience. Henry Davis, CEO of the Davis and Vanderbilt Group, observed Emily for a few seconds. There was something in his gaze, not pity, perhaps curiosity, that made Emily feel even more out of place. "Come with me," he said, indicating a more private area of the store. "Megan, please bring some water for the lady." Emily followed him, aware of the gazes that tracked her every step. Ryan began to cry again, a weak cry that broke her heart. She gently rocked him, trying to calm him down. "Your son seems to be hungry," Henry observed, as he pulled out a chair for her. "He is," Emily admitted, her voice breaking. "That's why I need to sell the ring. It's the only value I have." Henry extended his hand, and Emily gave him the small jewel. Their fingers touched briefly, and she noticed the contrast between her calloused hands and his perfectly manicured ones. "Where did this ring come from?" he asked, examining the piece under the light. "It was my grandmother's. She gave it to me before she—" Emily hesitated, avoiding the word. "Before she passed. She said it was special, but I never imagined it could be worth much." Henry frowned, turning the ring between his fingers with growing interest. One of the customers, a middle-aged man with a discreet cell phone, filmed the scene without Emily noticing. "I need to analyze this more carefully," Henry said, standing up. "Please wait a moment." While he walked away with the ring, Megan returned with a glass of water that Emily could barely hold with her trembling hands. The baby remained restless, and she tried to calm him with soft words, though she knew only milk would solve the problem. In a discreet laboratory at the store, Henry used precision instruments to inspect the ring. His expression gradually changed from professional curiosity to genuine surprise. The green stone wasn't a simple colored glass, as he had initially suspected. It was a legitimate Colombian emerald, cut with a rare technique used in the 1940s to 1950s. But what really intrigued him was what he discovered when examining the inside of the band. A small engraved coat of arms, almost invisible to the naked eye. Henry knew that symbol. He had seen it in old catalogs, in a private collection of historical American jewelry. "Paul," he called on the phone, "I need you to come immediately to the main store. Bring your authentication equipment. I found something you need to see." Paul Mitchell was a renowned antique dealer and specialist in historical jewelry, a longtime friend of the Davis family. If anyone could confirm his suspicions, it would be him. Henry returned to the area of the store where he had left Emily. She was still there, cradling the baby in her arms with deep dark circles and an anxious look. "Ms. Anderson," he said, sitting in front of her, "this ring may be more valuable than you imagine. I need to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind." "I just want to know how much I can get for it," Emily replied directly. "My son needs milk, and I have bills to pay." "I understand," Henry nodded, "but I believe we're looking at something truly unique. Could you tell me more about your grandmother? What was her full name?" "Celeste Anderson," Emily responded, intrigued by his interest. "She raised me since I was little after my mother." Again she avoided completing the sentence. "It was always just the two of us until I met Ryan's father." Her face hardened slightly. "Who disappeared as soon as he found out about the pregnancy?" Henry observed her attentively, as if each word were a puzzle piece. "And your grandmother never mentioned the origin of this ring? Never talked about her family?" "Almost nothing," Emily admitted. "She said the past should stay in the past. All I know is that she came from upstate to New York City when she was very young. Why are you asking me all this? Is the ring worth something or not?" At that moment, Henry's cell phone vibrated. It was a message from his assistant. "The video of the woman with the baby in the store already has more than 20,000 views. The press is calling." Henry looked at Emily and the baby in her arms. Something beyond the commercial value of the ring compelled him to act. "Ms. Anderson, I can buy your ring right now for $10,000, he said, watching her eyes widen. "But I believe it could be worth much more, if you could give me a few days to investigate properly." "10,000? Emily repeated, stunned. It was more money than she had managed to save in the last 2 years. "Are you serious?" "Completely. And I can advance 5,000 right now as a guarantee, while we do a more detailed analysis." Emily felt the tears she had held back all day finally escape. Ryan, as if feeling his mother's emotion, stopped whimpering for a moment. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, suspicious of the sudden generosity. Henry hesitated, his normally controlled expression revealing an unexpected vulnerability. "Let's say I recognize value when I see it," he replied, handing her a handkerchief. "And I'm not just talking about the ring." Emily didn't know it, but that encounter would be just the beginning of a journey that would completely transform her life. What had begun as an act of desperation would reveal itself as a door to a past she had never imagined. A past connected not only to the history of the Davis and Vanderbilt jewelry store itself, but also to her true identity. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. Emily's small apartment in Riverside Heights seemed different that night. The same peeling walls, the same worn sofa, the same noisy refrigerator. But there was something new in the air. Hope. Sitting in the only armchair in the room, she watched Ryan sleep peacefully in his improvised crib, his stomach finally full after days. With the $5,000 advanced by Henry Davis, Emily had bought not only baby formula for Ryan, but also food for herself, paid the overdue rent, and still had some savings left. It seemed like a miracle, Her gaze fell on the card the businessman had given her, with the golden logo of the jewelry store and a cell phone number handwritten on the back. "Call if you need anything," he had said, with a seriousness that intrigued her. Meanwhile, less than 20 miles away, in a penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park, Henry Davis remained bent over old documents spread across his dining table. The antique dealer Paul Mitchell had confirmed his initial suspicions. The ring was a rare piece, part of a collection created especially for a young woman from New York high society in the 1960s. "Are you absolutely sure?" asked Henry, holding the detailed report Paul had prepared. "Without a doubt," replied the antique dealer, adjusting his reading glasses. "See the microscopic signature inside the band. It's by Antonio Caruso, one of the greatest Italian jewelers who immigrated to America after the war. He created only 7 pieces with this specific emerald cutting technique, all for the same client." "Eleanor Vanderbilt," Henry murmured, pronouncing the name as if testing its flavor. "Exactly. The young heiress who disappeared during the Cold War era, after secretly marrying a medical student, considered subversive by the authorities." Paul paused. "The most interesting thing is that the other 6 pieces are catalogued in museums or private collections. This is the only one that was missing." Henry stood up and walked to the window, observing the city lights. Vanderbilt wasn't just the name of the founding partner of the company he now directed. It was also the surname of his late paternal grandmother, Beatrice Vanderbilt Davis. "Do you think there could be any connection between this Eleanor and my family?" he asked, more to himself than to Paul. "It's possible. America is smaller than it seems when we talk about certain traditional families," replied the antique dealer. "But we would need more information about this Emily Anderson. By the way, have you seen this?" Paul turned his tablet toward Henry, showing a video that was going viral on social media. In it, Emily could be seen inside the jewelry store, holding Ryan and saying with a breaking voice, "Will you buy my ring? I need milk for my son." The scene, discreetly filmed by a customer, had generated a wave of comments, most criticizing social inequality and demanding a stance from Davis and Vanderbilt jewelry. "My press officer already alerted me," said Henry, running his hand through his hair, a rare gesture that betrayed his concern. "We're preparing an official statement." "A statement won't be enough," warned Paul. "People want action, not words, and you know that better than anyone." The comment touched a sensitive point for Henry. At 38, he had transformed the family's traditional jewelry business into a luxury market powerhouse, but he had always been bothered by the frivolity of the sector. His dream had always been to create a brand with purpose, one that told real stories and had a positive impact. That dream had been constantly sabotaged by the administrative board, mostly composed of conservative uncles. "Perhaps this is the opportunity I've been waiting for," Henry murmured. The next morning, Emily was surprised by a call. It was Fiona Baker, Henry Davis's executive assistant, inviting her to a meeting at the administrative headquarters of Davis and Vanderbilt. "But what about my son? I have no one to leave him with," Emily explained. "Mr. Davis said you can bring him, no problem," replied Fiona. "A car will be sent to pick you up at 2 p.m. Is the address we have correct?" Emily hesitated. She hadn't told Henry where she lived. How had he gotten that information? At 2 p.m. sharp, a uniformed driver was ringing the doorbell of the small apartment. Emily had spent the entire morning trying to choose appropriate clothing, eventually opting for the only dress she had, a simple navy blue model that she kept for special occasions. She tied her brown hair in an improvised bun and, with Ryan in her arms, entered the luxurious black SUV. The headquarters of Davis and Vanderbilt occupied a historic building on Park Avenue with a preserved Art Deco facade and modern interiors. Fiona, a middle-aged woman with a welcoming smile that contrasted with her professional demeanor, received Emily in the lobby. "Mr. Davis is eager to meet with you," she said, leading her down the elegant corridor adorned with historical photographs of the jewelry store. "He rarely shows enthusiasm for anything, you know. You made a strong impression." Emily didn't know what to reply. Everything there seemed to belong to a parallel universe: the marble floors, the elegant employees, the respectful silence. Ryan, surprisingly, remained calm in her arms, looking around with curiosity. Henry awaited them in a meeting room with a panoramic view of the city. Contrary to the corporate environment Emily expected, The space had a welcoming air, with comfortable sofas instead of the traditional meeting table. At his side was Paul Mitchell, who stood up to greet her. "Ms. Anderson, thank you for coming," said Henry, approaching to receive her. His eyes fell on Ryan. "I see the little one is doing better." "Thanks to you," replied Emily, feeling genuine gratitude despite the distrust she still maintained. The money was more than generous. "Please sit down," Henry indicated. "This is Paul Mitchell, one of the country's foremost experts in historical jewelry." Paul smiled, extending his hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Anderson. Your ring is absolutely fascinating." "Just Emily, please," she corrected, settling on the sofa with Ryan in her arms. "So, did you discover something about my grandmother's ring?" Henry and Paul exchanged glances, as if deciding where to begin. "Emily," Henry started, sitting across from her, "what I'm about to tell you might seem surprising, perhaps even implausible, but I ask that you listen carefully." In the hours that followed, Emily heard a story that seemed to come from a novel. "The ring," explained Paul, "was part of a set created especially for Eleanor Vanderbilt, daughter of one of the most influential families in New York in the 1960s. Eleanor had disappeared during the darkest period of the Cold War, after secretly marrying a young doctor named Richard Adams, considered subversive by the authorities. The marriage was kept secret because the Vanderbilt family had connections with the government," explained Paul. "Eleanor knew she would be disinherited if they found out, but she was determined to follow her heart." "And what happened to them?" asked Emily, engrossed in the narrative despite not understanding how it connected to her. "They fled to rural Vermont," continued Paul. "They adopted new names, new identities. Eleanor took with her only a few jewels she had inherited from her mother, including this ring that apparently ended up in the hands of your grandmother." Emily frowned, trying to process the information. "Are you suggesting that my grandmother knew this Eleanor, or perhaps bought the ring from her?" Henry leaned forward, his expression serious but gentle. "Emily, we believe your grandmother, Celeste Anderson, might have been Eleanor Vanderbilt herself." The silence that followed was interrupted only by Ryan's soft cooing. Emily felt the world spin around her. This didn't make sense. Her grandmother, the simple seamstress who had raised her in modest conditions, a fugitive heiress. It was absurd. "That's impossible," she finally said, standing up with Ryan in her arms. "My grandmother never mentioned anything like this. We always lived with financial difficulties. If she was this rich person you say, why would we have struggled?" "There are many possibilities," intervened Paul. "Eleanor and Richard might have lost everything during their escape. They might have chosen to live discreetly to avoid being found, or perhaps they were robbed. What we know for certain is that this ring belonged to Eleanor Vanderbilt. And there's more," added Henry, also standing up. "Vanderbilt is my paternal grandmother's surname. There's a possibility that Eleanor was her relative, perhaps a cousin. We're investigating this connection." Emily shook her head, incredulous. It was too much information, too many implications. "What do you want from me, after all?" she asked, her voice betraying a mixture of confusion and defensiveness. Henry took a deep breath before answering. "We want to propose a partnership. The story of your ring, combined with the video that went viral on social media, has created a unique opportunity. We're launching a new line of jewelry, inspired by real stories of American women, the Legacy Project. We'd like you to be the face of this campaign." "Me?" Emily almost laughed. "Look at me, Mr. Davis. I'm not a model. I have no experience with any of this. I barely managed to keep my secretary job." "That's exactly why you're perfect," Henry replied with conviction. "Your authenticity, your strength in the face of adversity. Besides, there's the intriguing possibility that you are, in fact, a Vanderbilt heir." "And if I am," Emily challenged, "what does that change in my life now?" "It could change everything," Henry responded. "Or nothing, if you prefer. The choice is yours. But before you decide, I'd like you to meet someone." At that moment, Fiona entered the room, accompanied by an elderly gentleman who leaned on a cane. His eyes, despite his age, were lively and penetrating. Upon seeing Emily with the baby, he stopped, as if he had seen a ghost. "Emily, this is Alfred Vanderbilt," Henry introduced, "my father's uncle, and the last living member of Eleanor's generation." The elderly man approached slowly, his eyes fixed on Emily's face. "You have her eyes," he said with an emotional voice. The same eyes as my sister Eleanor. Time seemed to have stopped in the library of the Vanderbilt mansion in Westchester. The aroma of old books mingled with the soft perfume of the orchids that adorned the environment. Emily, seated in a leather armchair, held a black and white photo album, while Ryan slept peacefully in the portable crib that Henry had arranged. A week had passed since the meeting with Alfred Vanderbilt, and each day brought new revelations about a past Emily had never imagined. Alfred, at 82, was a retired diplomat who had spent decades discreetly searching for his missing sister. When he saw the viral video of Emily in the jewelry store, something intrigued him. Upon learning about the ring, he immediately asked to meet her. "This is Eleanor at 20, explained Alfred, pointing to a photograph where an elegant young woman smiled at the camera in front of a country house. It was her birthday, 1965, a few months before she met Richard. Emily studied the image with a lump in her throat. The resemblance was undeniable. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same face shape, even the smile had something familiar. "And this," continued Alfred, turning the page, "is the last photo I have of her in 1967, shortly before she disappeared." In the photograph, Eleanor looked more serious, her gaze distant, as if already planning her escape. She wore a set of jewelry that included the ring that was now under detailed analysis at the Davis and Vanderbilt laboratory. "My grandmother never mentioned any of this," murmured Emily, still resisting accepting this fantastic story. "She raised me alone after my mother left us. We were always poor, Alfred. How would that be possible if she was an heiress?" Alfred sighed deeply, closing the album. "When Eleanor fled with Richard, our father officially disinherited her. He cut off her access to the family accounts, sold her properties, tried to erase her existence. He was a hard, inflexible man." His eyes filled with sadness. "I tried to help her secretly, but I lost contact after I had to leave the country on diplomatic service. Years later, when I returned and tried to find her, I discovered that Richard had died in an accident. But I couldn't locate Eleanor or the daughter they supposedly had." "My mother," said Emily, connecting the dots, "Julia Anderson, who was probably born as Julia Adams, daughter of Richard and Eleanor," Henry complimented, who had been observing the scene in silence until then. "Your grandmother must have adopted the surname Anderson during the escape. But that still doesn't explain why they remained poor," insisted Emily. "If Eleanor had valuable jewelry, a woman alone, fleeing during the Cold War, with a small daughter," pondered Alfred. "She probably sold the jewelry to survive, keeping only the ring for some sentimental value. Or perhaps she was robbed. We'll never know for sure what happened." Henry approached, sitting in a chair near Emily. "There is a way to definitively confirm all of this," he said. "A DNA test comparing you and Alfred." Emily looked at Ryan, who slept oblivious to the revelations transforming his family's history. "And if it's true," she asked, almost to herself, "what changes in my life, in my son's life?" "Legally," explained Henry, "you could have a right to part of the Vanderbilt inheritance. The family still has considerable properties and investments, despite no longer being as prominent as in the past." "It's not for the money that I've searched for Eleanor all these years," intervened Alfred, his voice breaking. "It's for family, for blood, for history that cannot be lost." He hesitated, then continued, "There's also her personal archive, documents and letters I've kept all these years. They belong to you, if you are truly her granddaughter." Emily closed her eyes for a moment. It was as if she were in an elaborate dream, about to wake up at any instant. When she opened them again, she saw that Henry was watching her with a disconcerting intensity. "I would like to take the test," she finally decided. "I need to know the truth." The following days were a whirlwind. The DNA test was conducted urgently, while Emily divided her time between the Vanderbilt mansion, where Alfred insisted she and Ryan stay, and the Davis and Vanderbilt headquarters, where Henry introduced her to the project he had mentioned. "The Legacy Project isn't just a line of jewelry," he explained as they walked through the company's design studio. "It's a new direction for the brand. We want to tell real stories of American women, create pieces that carry meaning, purpose. Your story, Eleanor's journey, the ring that crossed generations to finally bring you to us, is exactly what we were looking for." "I still don't understand why me," Emily confessed. "I know nothing about jewelry or fashion." "That's precisely why," Henry replied, stopping to face her. "You bring authenticity. We don't just want a pretty face for the campaign. We want a true story with all its complexities. There was something about the way he looked at her that made Emily feel simultaneously exposed and protected. Henry Davis was an enigma, the ruthless businessman who commanded a luxury empire with an iron hand, but who showed unexpected sensitivity and kindness when they were alone. In the third week after their meeting at the jewelry store, the DNA test results arrived, confirming what the evidence already suggested. Emily was, indeed, Eleanor Vanderbilt's granddaughter. The news fell like a bomb on New York high society, amplified by the viralization of the story on social media. From ring seller to heiress, the incredible story of the woman who was seeking milk for her son was just one of the headlines circulating online. "We're receiving hundreds of interview requests," informed Fiona, showing Emily the list of media outlets interested in her story. "Magazines, TV shows, podcasts, everyone wants to talk to you." "I don't know if I'm ready for this," replied Emily, feeling overwhelmed. "I'm still trying to understand what all this means." "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," assured Henry, entering the meeting room where they were. "The story belongs to you, Emily. Only you decide how and when to share it." There was a new dynamic between them, a mutual respect that was evolving into something more complex. Henry, normally reserved and practical, found himself seeking pretexts to be near Emily. She, in turn, felt increasingly comfortable in his presence, appreciating the way he interacted with Ryan, always attentive and affectionate. On a particularly busy afternoon, while discussing the details of the contract that would make Emily the official ambassador of the Legacy Project, Henry received a call that made him turn pale. "What? When?" he asked, standing up abruptly. "I'm heading there right now." He hung up the phone and looked at Emily. "Alfred had a sudden illness. He's being taken to Mount Sinai Hospital." The following hours were tense. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed a minor stroke, fortunately detected in time to avoid permanent damage. Emily remained at Alfred's bedside, holding his wrinkled hand while he slept under the effect of sedatives. Henry stayed with her the entire time, providing everything necessary, from the best specialists to an appropriate crib for Ryan in the private room. "You don't have to stay," said Emily when night fell, "for you must have important commitments." "Nothing more important than this," he simply replied, sitting beside her. When Alfred finally woke up the next morning, his eyes immediately searched for Emily. "You have so much of her," murmured the elderly man, weakly squeezing her hand. "Not just the appearance, but the strength. Eleanor was always the strongest of us." "Rest, uncle," she asked, the word sounding strange on her lips. "The doctor said you'll recover completely, but you need to stay calm." "There's no time for calm at my age," he replied with a weak smile. "I need to show you something. In my office, in the second drawer of the desk, there's a wooden box with the letter E carved on it. Bring it to me, please." Emily looked at Henry, who nodded. "Go get it. I'll stay with him and Ryan." At the Vanderbilt mansion, Emily easily found the mentioned box. It was a beautifully crafted object, with dark wood and marquetry details. Upon opening it, she found a set of letters yellowed by time, old photographs, and a small leather-bound notebook. Back at the hospital, she handed the box to Alfred, who opened it with trembling hands. "This is Eleanor's diary," he explained, removing the notebook. She kept it secretly for years, since her adolescence. When she found out she was pregnant and planned to flee, she gave it to me to keep. She said that one day it might be important. Alfred leafed through the diary until he found a specific page, marked with a faded ribbon. "Here," he said, handing the open notebook to Emily. "Read." The handwritten words, in an elegant calligraphy, jumped from the page. "March 10th, 1967. Today I confirmed what I already suspected. I'm expecting Richard's child. Under any other circumstance, this would be the happiest day of my life. But how can I celebrate when we are persecuted? When our love is considered a crime? Father will never accept a grandchild from a subversive, as he calls my husband. We have decided we must leave. Richard has obtained new documents for us. We're going to rural Vermont. I will take only a few jewels I inherited from Mother, for their financial value, but mainly for their sentimental value. The emerald ring especially, which I hope to one day pass on to my daughter. I'm sure it will be a girl. Alfred is the only one who knows, the only one I can trust. May God protect us on this journey." Emily felt tears streaming down her face as she read the words of her grandmother. No, her great-grandmother. Eleanor's voice, preserved through time, spoke directly to her heart. The puzzle pieces finally fit together. "She was expecting a girl," whispered Emily. "And she had one." "My mother." "Julia," confirmed Alfred, whom I unfortunately never met. When I finally got clues about Eleanor's whereabouts years later, I learned that her daughter had already left, leaving behind a small child, you. "Why did my mother abandon us?" asked Emily, the old pain still present in her voice. "And why did my grandmother never tell me about all this?" "Fear can make people make difficult decisions," Alfred answered gently. "Eleanor lived for decades hiding her identity, fearing reprisals. Even after the end of the Cold War tensions, the trauma remained. As for your mother," he hesitated, "I can only imagine that carrying the weight of this secret, this fragmented history, must have been too difficult for her." Henry, who had been observing the scene in silence, approached. "Emily," he said kindly, "I know it's a lot of information to process, but there's a decision you need to make. The Legacy Project is ready to launch, and the press won't stop speculating about your story. How do you want to proceed?" Emily looked at the diary in her hands, at Alfred in the hospital bed, at Ryan sleeping peacefully in the improvised crib, and finally, at Henry, whose eyes reflected a silent understanding. "I want to tell the complete story," she decided, "not just for me, but for Eleanor, for my mother, for all the women who had their voices silenced. And I want to use this platform for something bigger." "What do you have in mind?" asked Henry, intrigued. Emily straightened her shoulders, a new determination shining in her eyes. "A foundation to help single mothers in vulnerable situations, women like me who didn't have the luck to find a valuable ring or discover a lost inheritance. Women who need real support, not temporary charity." A slow smile formed on Henry's lips. "I think we just found the true heart of the Legacy Project," he said, evident admiration in his voice. The spotlights illuminated the space set up at the Metropolitan Pavilion in Chelsea. An elegant runway serpentined among the guests, surrounded by giant panels that told, in images and words, the story of Eleanor Vanderbilt and her emerald ring. Celebrities, digital influencers, and journalists packed the environment, all eager to witness the launch of the Legacy Project. Backstage, Emily observed her reflection in the mirror. She wore a long emerald green dress, specially designed for the occasion by a renowned stylist. Her hair, normally tied in a simple bun, was loose in soft waves. Light makeup enhanced her features without transforming them. The reflected image was hers, but also strangely different, as if Eleanor were looking through her eyes. "Nervous?" asked Henry, approaching behind her. In the mirror, their gazes met. "Terrified," Emily admitted with a tense smile. "I've never spoken in public before, much less to hundreds of people." "You don't need to say anything beyond what you feel," he replied, gently placing his hands on her shoulders. The touch sent an electric current down her spine. "Your story is powerful enough." 3 months had passed since the discovery of her true identity. 3 months of transformations so intense that at times Emily had difficulty recognizing her own life. She had moved with Ryan to a wing of the Vanderbilt mansion, at Alfred's insistent request, who was gradually recovering and found in the presence of his great-grandson a new reason to live. The time she spent at the Davis and Vanderbilt headquarters had evolved from simple meetings to a genuine involvement with the Legacy Project. Henry had introduced her to the world of jewelry, not just as a model or spokesperson, but as an active collaborator in the development of the collection. "You have a unique perspective," he had said, after seeing her suggest modifications to the design of one of the pieces. "You can see beyond commercial value. You see the story behind each jewel." The relationship between them had also evolved, balancing on a fine line between professionalism and something deeper that neither dared to name. Henry, always reserved and pragmatic, constantly surprised himself by looking for excuses to prolong their conversations. Emily, in turn, felt divided between gratitude for what he had done for her and an attraction that grew stronger each day. 5 minutes, announced Fiona, entering the dressing room. "Everyone is in their places." Henry gave one last encouraging squeeze to Emily's shoulders before stepping away. "I'll be right by your side the whole time," he assured. On the main stage, under carefully projected lights, Emily felt the weight of hundreds of gazes upon her. Seated in an elegant armchair with Henry at her side, she watched as the presenter, a famous fashion journalist, introduced the event. a story that seems like fiction, but is absolutely real. A ring that crossed generations, wars and losses to finally complete its circle. A woman who discovered her roots in the most unlikely way. The words flowed around her as images were projected on giant screens, photographs of young Eleanor, the original ring, historical documents, recent headlines about the jewelry store miracle. When it was her turn to speak, Emily was surprised by the firmness of her own voice. 4 months ago, I was just a desperate mother trying to get milk for my son, she began, feeling the audience's emotion. Today I stand before you not just as a Vanderbilt heir, but as someone who understood that legacies are more than names or fortunes. They are stories, they are choices, they are responsibilities. As she spoke, Emily's eyes found Alfred's in the front row, smiling with pride, and those of Martha Allen, the retired nurse who had cared for her and Ryan during the difficult first days in Riverside Heights. Inviting her to the event had been Emily's personal decision, a way to honor the people who helped her when no one else would. That's why the Legacy Project isn't just a collection of jewelry, she continued, but the beginning of something bigger. Today I have the pleasure of officially announcing the creation of the Eleanor Vanderbilt Foundation, dedicated to supporting single mothers in vulnerable situations across America. Spontaneous applause interrupted her speech. At her side, Henry smiled with a gleam in his eyes that went beyond professional pride. Each piece sold from the Legacy collection will contribute to the foundation, he explained, taking the floor. But more important than that, each jewel will carry a real story of strength and resilience. The inaugural collection is inspired by Eleanor's journey, but future ones will celebrate other American women whose stories deserve to be told. The event continued with the display of the pieces, all contemporary reinterpretations of the famous emerald ring, each representing a chapter in Eleanor's story. Models of different ethnicities, ages, and physical types walked the runway, a decision by Emily that had initially met resistance from the marketing department, but which Henry had supported without hesitation. After the show, as guests mingled at the cocktail reception, Emily found herself surrounded by journalists and celebrities, all wanting to hear more details of her story. Henry remained close, discreetly guiding her through the crowd when the pressure became excessive. "You were amazing," he whispered in her ear during a brief moment alone. "You didn't seem like the same person who walked into my jewelry store 4 months ago." "I'm not the same," Emily admitted. "But I'm also not completely different. I still care about the same things. I still have the same values." "That's exactly what makes you special," Henry replied, his eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made her heart race. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of Teresa Montgomery, one of the company's most conservative board members, Henry's aunt on his father's side. "Impressive event, nephew," she commented with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Although a bit excessive for my taste. All this social impact talk might dilute the brand's exclusivity, you know." "The numbers disagree, Aunt," Henry replied coldly. "Pre-sales of the Legacy collection have already exceeded our most optimistic projections." "Numbers don't tell the whole story," retorted Teresa, casting an evaluative look at Emily. "Emotional stories sell in the short term, but luxury brands survive through exclusivity, not inclusion." "Perhaps it's time to redefine what luxury is," intervened Emily, maintaining her composure despite the clear hostility. "For me, true luxury is having choices, being able to make a difference. My great-grandmother's ring wasn't valuable just for its materials, but for the story it carried." Teresa arched an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the articulate response. "Interesting perspective, Ms. Anderson. Or should I say, Ms. Vanderbilt?" Her tone was polite but loaded with insinuation. "I sincerely hope that your influence over my nephew and our company is as positive as he believes." After Teresa's departure, Henry sighed heavily. "I apologize for her behavior. Part of the board still resists change." "Don't worry," Emily assured him. "I understand perfectly. I'm an intruder in your world." "No," he replied firmly, holding her hands. "You're exactly what this world needed." The exchange of glances between them said more than words could express. In the days following the event, media coverage was overwhelming. The story of the Fifth Avenue Cinderella, as some outlets nicknamed her, captured the public's imagination. The original video, which had shown Emily asking to sell the ring, now had millions of views. Celebrities and influencers shared the story, transforming the Legacy project into a viral phenomenon. But not all the attention was positive. Some questioned the veracity of the story, insinuating that everything was just an elaborate marketing strategy. Others investigated Emily's past, looking for inconsistencies or scandals. They found Ryan's father, informed Fiona during an emergency meeting 2 weeks after the launch. Brian Smith, 23, engineering student at NYU. He's already given an interview to a news portal claiming that you hid the pregnancy from him. Emily turned pale. Brian had disappeared as soon as he learned of the pregnancy, blocking her on all social media. Seeing him now, taking advantage of her newly acquired fame, was painful. "What does he want?" she asked, feeling her throat dry. "Money, obviously," replied Henry, anger evident in his controlled voice, but also recognition as a father. "He says he wants to be part of his son's life, after abandoning him before he was even born." Emily's indignation was palpable. "He doesn't have that right." "Legally, he does," corrected the lawyer present at the meeting. "If paternity is proven, he can request shared custody, regular visits." The room spun around Emily. The idea of sharing Ryan with someone who had abandoned them, who only returned now out of financial interest, was unbearable. "I won't allow him to use my son as a ticket to the Vanderbilt fortune," she declared, determined. "And we won't allow it," Henry assured. "But we need to be strategic. A public legal battle would be harmful for everyone, especially for Ryan." While they discussed legal strategies, Emily's cell phone vibrated with a notification. It was a message from Brian. "We need to talk for the good of our son." That night, after putting Ryan to sleep, Emily found herself alone on the veranda of the Vanderbilt mansion, contemplating the city lights. New York seemed different from that height, less threatening, more like a carpet of earthly stars. Her thoughts were interrupted by Henry's arrival, who brought 2 glasses of wine. "I thought you might need this," he said, handing her a glass and sitting beside her. "Thank you," Emily murmured, accepting the drink. "For this and for everything." They remained silent for a few minutes, just contemplating the view and each other's presence. It was Henry who finally spoke. "You know, when you walked into the jewelry store that day, something changed. Not just for you, but for me, too." Emily looked at him, surprised by the sudden confession. "What do you mean?" "I was stagnant," he admitted. "Running a business I inherited, following a path traced by generations before me. The Legacy project existed only as a concept, something the board always rejected as being too risky or not aligned with our tradition." He paused, taking a sip of wine. "Then you appeared with Ryan in your arms and that ring. It was as if the universe was giving me a push, saying, 'This is it. It's time.' I'm glad to have been useful to your business plan," Emily joked, although there was a tinge of uncertainty in her voice. "It's not that," Henry replied, placing his glass on the table and turning completely toward her. "You weren't a means to an end, Emily. You were, something I didn't expect to find. Someone who made me question everything, rethink priorities." Emily's heart accelerated. His proximity, the warmth of his gaze, the sincerity in his voice, everything conspired to break down the barriers she had carefully maintained. "Henry, He raised his hand, gently touching her face. "You don't need to say anything. I know it's complicated. Your life has been turned upside down. You have Ryan to think about, and now this problem with Brian. I just want you to know that I'm here, not as your boss or business partner, but as someone who cares." Deeply, their gazes met, loaded with unspoken emotions. For a moment, Emily thought he would kiss her. Part of her desperately wanted that, while another part feared the complications such a step would bring. The moment was interrupted by Ryan's cry, coming through the baby monitor that Emily always kept nearby. They both pulled away, the spell broken. "Duty calls," she said, with a melancholic smile, standing up. "Always," Henry agreed, also standing. "But this conversation isn't over, Emily Vanderbilt." As she walked away to attend to her son, the certainty that her life had been irrevocably transformed weighed on her shoulders, not just by the newly discovered name or the unexpected inheritance, but by this man and the feelings he awakened. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We'll continue. The Manhattan Cafe on the ground floor of the Time Warner Center buzzed with the typical bustle of a Friday afternoon. Emily watched the door, trying to control the anxiety that made her heart beat erratically. She had chosen a public place for the meeting, following the advice of the legal team hired by Henry. Ryan had remained at the Vanderbilt mansion, in the care of Alfred and the newly hired nanny. When Brian Smith finally entered the cafe, Emily almost didn't recognize him. The carefree young man she had met a year ago, with casual clothes and disheveled hair, had given way to an impeccably dressed young man with a conservative haircut and a studied posture. He carried a leather briefcase that seemed too new, probably bought for the occasion. "Emily," he greeted with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You look different." "Sit down, Brian," she replied coldly, indicating the chair across from her. "Let's get straight to the point. What do you want?" He seemed momentarily disconcerted by the direct approach, but quickly composed himself, placing the briefcase on the table. "I want to meet my son," he declared, trying to imprint sincerity in his voice. "It's my right as a father." "Father?" Emily repeated, incredulous. "You weren't a father when you disappeared after learning about the pregnancy. You weren't a father when you blocked my calls. You weren't a father when I was counting pennies to buy milk." Brian had the decency to look embarrassed, but quickly returned to his rehearsed posture. "I made mistakes, I admit. I was young, scared, but now I want to do the right thing." He opened the briefcase, removing some papers. "I have plans, Emily, for the three of us." "There is no three of us," she cut him off. "There's Ryan, there's you, and there's me. And my priority is my son's well-being." "Our son," Brian corrected, his expression hardening slightly. "And I care about him too. That's why I think we should resolve this amicably, without involving courts." Emily observed the papers he placed on the table, drafts of a shared custody agreement with financial clauses underlined in red. "So that's it," she concluded, pushing the documents back to him without even reading them completely. "Money. You want your share of the Vanderbilt treasure." "Don't be unfair," protested Brian, though his eyes betrayed his true intention. "Of course the financial aspect is important. Ryan deserves the best, after all. But what I really want is to be part of his life. And part of the media," added Emily. "The interviews, the events, the fame that comes with the name." Brian didn't deny it, just readjusted his tie, visibly uncomfortable. "We have a proposal for you," said Emily after a moment, her voice calm and controlled. "A paternity agreement that includes financial support for Ryan and supervised visits. Initially monthly, potentially progressing depending on how he responds to your presence." "Supervised visits? As if I were some kind of criminal?" Brian's indignation was palpable. "As if you were a stranger to an 8-month-old baby," Emily corrected. "Which is exactly what you are. Ryan doesn't know you, Brian. He doesn't recognize your voice, your smell, your touch. Abruptly introducing you into his life would be traumatic." Brian considered the words for a moment, his calculating gaze. "And what about the press? Social media?" Emily took a deep breath, trying to contain her growing anger. No public exposure of Ryan without mutual consent. No interviews about him without prior approval. "If your interest is really in being a father and not using our son as a springboard to fame, this shouldn't be a problem." Brian's expression oscillated between frustration and calculation, as if evaluating how much it was worth fighting for. "I need to think," he finally said, collecting the papers, "and consult my lawyer." "You have until Monday," Emily replied, standing up. "After that, we'll let the court decide." As she watched Brian leave the cafe, Emily felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The confrontation had been less catastrophic than she had feared, but it was far from a resolution. Back at the Vanderbilt mansion, she found Henry in the garden with Ryan. The scene, the powerful businessman sitting on the grass, awkwardly playing with colored blocks while the baby babbled happily, provoked a wave of tenderness that almost unbalanced her. "How did it go?" Henry asked upon seeing her, standing up with Ryan in his arms. "As well as could be expected," she replied, extending her arms to her son, who immediately leaned in her direction. "He wants money and fame, as we predicted. And are you okay with that?" The genuine concern in his eyes touched her deeply. "No," Emily admitted, hugging Ryan against her chest. "But I'm prepared. Thanks to you." Over the months, Henry had become much more than a mentor or ally in business. He was a pillar in her personal life, a confidant, someone she instinctively trusted. The almost kiss on the veranda had remained as a question mark between them, something not mentioned but constantly present. The lawyer called earlier, Henry informed as they walked together into the house. He believes we have a strong case if Brian refuses the proposal. His history of abandonment during the entire pregnancy and first months will weigh against him. I don't want to prevent Ryan from knowing his father, Emily explained, sitting on one of the sofas in the main living room. I just want to protect him from someone who clearly has interests other than his well-being. Henry nodded, understanding. Alfred wants to talk to you, by the way. He's in the office with the foundation people. It seems the first projects are ready for approval. The Eleanor Vanderbilt Foundation had become Emily's main focus in recent weeks. Using part of the newly discovered inheritance and the funds generated by the Legacy Project, she was establishing a support network for single mothers in vulnerable situations, starting with New York City, but with plans for national expansion. In the office, she found Alfred gathered with a diverse team of social workers, educators, and administrators. The elderly man, visibly healthier and more energetic since Emily and Ryan had entered his life, smiled upon seeing them. "Ah, finally! We were just discussing the location of the first support center." In the minutes that followed, Emily immersed herself in discussions about the project. The idea was to create spaces that offered not just emergency assistance, such as diapers, milk, and food, but also psychological support, professional guidance, daycare, and training. A place she herself would have desperately needed months ago. "We thought of Riverside Heights for the first unit," explained Caroline Miller, the social worker leading the team. "The region has a high concentration of single mothers below the poverty line, and there's an available property that would serve perfectly." Emily felt a wave of emotion. Riverside Heights, where she had lived her most desperate moments, would be the first place to receive help. "It's perfect," she agreed. "When can we start?" As they discussed timelines and budgets, Emily noticed that Henry remained silent, observing her with an expression she couldn't completely decipher. There was pride there, certainly, but also something deeper, more personal. The meeting extended into the early evening. When it finally ended, Emily was exhausted but energized. For the first time since the discovery of her inheritance, she felt she was truly making a difference, using her new resources for something meaningful. After putting Ryan to sleep, she found Henry in the library, reviewing documents related to the Legacy Project. The yellowish light from the lamp cast shadows on his face, accentuating his strong features. "You should rest," he said upon seeing her. "It was an intense day." "I couldn't sleep now," Emily admitted, sitting in the opposite armchair. "My mind is racing." Henry smiled, putting the documents aside. "I understand perfectly. When an idea captures you, it's impossible to switch off." They remained silent for a few moments, a comfortable silence that had become characteristic between them. "I never properly thanked you," Emily finally said, "for everything you did. Not just for the ring, but for believing in me, for giving me a chance." "You didn't need a chance, Emily," Henry replied, his gaze intense. "Just an open door. Everything else, your strength, your intelligence, your compassion, was already there." Something in the way he looked at her made Emily's heart race. The unresolved tension between them seemed to grow each day, a magnetic force that was becoming increasingly difficult to resist. "Henry, about that night on the veranda?" Henry's phone rang, interrupting the moment. He looked at the screen with an apologetic expression before answering. "Fiona? What happened?" His face gradually transformed into a mask of concern. "I understand. Yes, we're on our way." Hanging up, he looked at Emily with gravity. "It's Teresa. She's called an extraordinary board meeting for tomorrow morning. Apparently she's questioning my leadership and the direction of the company." "Because of me?" asked Emily, feeling the weight of guilt. "Because of changes that were long overdue," Henry corrected, standing up. "Teresa and the conservative wing of the board never approved of my visions for the future of Davis and Vanderbilt. The Legacy Project, the partnership with the foundation, they're just catalysts for a conflict that already existed." Emily also stood up, concern evident on her face. "And if they vote against you? If they remove you from leadership?" Henry smiled, a smile that didn't completely reach his eyes. "Then I'll follow another path. There's much more to life than the family company, something I only clearly realized in recent months." His gaze fixed on hers, intense and meaningful. "Thanks to you." The tension between them was almost palpable now, charged with unspoken words and contained feelings. Emily took a step forward, impulsively, reducing the distance. "I don't want to be the cause of your downfall," she whispered. "You are exactly the opposite," he replied, his voice low and intense. "My salvation." This time, when their faces approached, no baby's cry interrupted them. The kiss was soft at first, hesitant, as if both feared breaking a spell. Then deeper, releasing months of accumulated tension, of feelings repressed by professionalism and circumstance. When they finally separated, breathless, Emily felt as if something had fundamentally changed in the universe. As if, finally, she had found a point of balance amid the whirlwind her life had become. "This complicates everything," she murmured, still in his arms. "Or simplifies," Henry replied, touching her face with tenderness. "It depends on the perspective." The moment of intimacy was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the corridor. They quickly moved apart, like teenagers caught by parents, seconds before Alfred entered the library. "Ah, you're still awake. Excellent." The elderly man seemed excited, holding a yellowed envelope. "I found something you need to see." Emily and Henry exchanged quick glances, a mixture of embarrassment and complicity in their expressions, before turning their attention to Alfred. "What did you discover?" asked Emily, trying to ignore the warmth she still felt in her face. "Letters," Alfred replied, placing the envelope on the table. "From my mother to Eleanor, never sent. I found them in a trunk in the attic." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. The letters, written on thin paper yellowed by time, revealed a side of the story that no one knew. The regret of the Vanderbilt matriarch, her frustrated attempts at reconciliation with her daughter, the pain of forced separation. "My grandmother tried to find her," murmured Emily, reading the words written in shaky handwriting. "Against grandfather's will." "Mother never accepted father's decision," confirmed Alfred, his eyes clouded with emotion. "But in those days women had little voice, especially in traditional families like ours." As she read the letters, Emily felt a new connection to her heritage, not just to the name or the Vanderbilt fortune, but to the women who came before her, their struggles, their sacrifices, their silent strength. Eleanor, who abandoned everything for love, the grandmother she never knew, torn between family duty and maternal love. "History repeats itself in strange ways," commented Henry, observing her. "Eleanor fled a world of privilege for love and freedom. Now you, her great-granddaughter, return to that world, but on your own terms." "I don't know if it's a return," reflected Emily. "I feel more like I'm creating something new, something that honors the past but isn't limited by it." Alfred nodded, understanding. "That's exactly what the family needs, Emily. Renewal, purpose. For decades, the Vanderbilt name represented only tradition and status. You bring something different, compassion, connection to the real world." The elderly man's words hung in the air, loaded with meaning for both Emily and Henry. Both faced crucial crossroads, she between fully embracing her new identity or staying true to her humbler origins. He between loyalty to the family business and the vision of a different future, possibly by her side. "Tomorrow will be a decisive day," said Henry, breaking the contemplative silence. "For all of us." In the corridor, as they said goodnight, their fingers briefly intertwined, a simple gesture that carried unverbalized promises, possibilities not yet explored. "Whatever the outcome of the meeting," whispered Emily, "I'll be by your side. That's all I need to know," he replied, softly kissing her forehead before moving away toward the stairs. The meeting room at Davis and Vanderbilt had never seemed so intimidating. Around the polished mahogany table, 12 serious faces observed Henry, who remained standing at the head, impeccable in his dark suit. Emily, seated in a chair near the wall, felt like an intruder in that territory, clearly demarcated by generations of tradition and power. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," began Henry, his firm voice echoing in the tense silence. "We are here today because some of you question the direction I am giving the company. You question the Legacy Project, the partnership with the Eleanor Vanderbilt Foundation, and, implicitly, my leadership ability." Teresa Montgomery, seated to the right of the table, exchanged significant glances with other older board members. "It's not a personal matter, Henry," she replied, her tone falsely conciliatory. "It's a legitimate concern with the brand's positioning." Davis and Vanderbilt has always represented exclusivity, tradition, discretion. This sudden turn towards social impact, this unbridled media exposure. She paused, briefly looking at Emily. We are diluting what makes us special. We are evolving, Henry corrected, as we have done several times throughout our history. When my great-grandfather incorporated elements of American modernism into traditional jewelry in the 1950s, many called it heresy. When my father decided to open the first branch outside New York City, he was accused of vulgarizing the brand. Each generation faces resistance when bringing necessary changes. Changes are one thing, intervened Charles Baptist, the oldest member of the board. Complete identity transformation is another. This obsession with purpose and impact may work for mass consumer brands, but our clients seek distinction, not virtue. Henry smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Allow me to disagree, Charles. Our latest numbers show exactly the opposite. He distributed some folders around the table. Sales of the Legacy collection have exceeded all our projections. We're attracting a new customer profile. Younger, yes, but equally affluent and, more importantly, more engaged. The conversion rate in our stores has increased by 27% since the launch. Teresa leafed through the reports with a skeptical expression. Impressive numbers for the short term, certainly. But what about the long term, and the loyalty of our traditional customers, and the brand value? The brand value is stronger than ever, Henry replied, projecting some slides on the screen behind him. Our research shows a significant increase in spontaneous recognition and positive perception. And as for traditional customers, the majority are responding positively to the renewal. The few who resist are a vocal minority, but statistically insignificant. The discussion continued for almost 2 hours, oscillating between financial analyses, market projections, and conceptual debates about the brand's identity. Emily observed, impressed by the way Henry navigated the arguments, always firm in his vision, but respectful even with the fiercest opponents. There is one last issue we need to address, said Teresa, when the meeting seemed to be coming to an end. The personal involvement of our CEO with Ms. Anderson, or should I say Ms. Vanderbilt. A heavy silence fell over the room. Emily felt the blood drain from her face, while Henry straightened his shoulders, visibly tense. My personal life is not on the agenda of this meeting, Teresa, he replied coldly. It is when it affects the company, she retorted. Internal sources mention that you have been seen in compromising situations. A relationship between the CEO and the main ambassador of our most important campaign represents a clear conflict of interest. Before Henry could respond, Emily stood up, attracting all eyes. Excuse me, she said, surprising herself with the firmness of her voice. I believe I have the right to speak since I'm being discussed as if I weren't present. Teresa arched an eyebrow, clearly annoyed by the interruption, but nodded. Certainly, Miss Vanderbilt. The board hears you. Emily took a deep breath, feeling the weight of 12 pairs of evaluating eyes. When I first entered this company, I was desperate. I had a hungry baby in my arms and a ring as my last hope. I didn't know Henry Davis. I knew nothing about my family's history. I had no idea how my life would change. She paused, organizing her thoughts. In the months that followed, I discovered not only my origins, but also a purpose. The Eleanor Vanderbilt Foundation is not an exercise in marketing or corporate social responsibility. It's an extension of what I myself needed and didn't have. Her voice gained strength as she spoke. As for my relationship with Henry, yes, we developed feelings for each other. We didn't plan it. We didn't seek it. It simply happened. But at no moment did it compromise professional decisions or the integrity of the project. Teresa opened her mouth to interrupt, but Emily continued, determined. I understand your concerns about the direction of the company. Tradition is important. History is valuable. But do you know what I discovered about my own family history? That Eleanor Vanderbilt, my great-grandmother, broke with oppressive traditions in search of freedom and love. That the true Vanderbilt heritage isn't in jewelry or properties, but in the courage to evolve, to challenge expectations. A murmur ran through the table as the board members exchanged surprised glances at the unexpected eloquence. If you'll allow me a suggestion, Emily concluded, perhaps the real conflict here isn't between tradition and innovation, but between fear and courage. between clinging to the past or embracing the future. When Emily sat back down, she felt shaky, as if she had run a marathon. Henry looked at her with a mixture of pride and gratitude before turning back to the board. "I have directed this company for 8 years," he said. "I took over at a difficult time when our numbers were falling and our competitors were gaining ground. I implemented changes, modernized processes, expanded markets. Our market value tripled under my management." He paused, looking each board member in the eye. "But I always felt something was missing, a greater purpose, a genuine connection with the present time. The legacy project and the partnership with the foundation aren't whims or deviations. They're the natural evolution of our brand." Teresa seemed about to contest again, but was interrupted by Alfred Vanderbilt, who entered the room leaning on his cane. "I apologize for being late," said the elderly man, walking slowly to an empty chair. "Age doesn't come alone, as you know." "Uncle Alfred," greeted Teresa, visibly surprised. "We weren't expecting your presence. This is an extraordinary meeting of the executive board, and I still hold 15% of this company's shares, my dear," he replied with an amiable smile. "I have every right to be here, especially when the future of Davis and Vanderbilt is at stake." Alfred looked around the table, his tired but still insightful eyes. "I heard part of the discussion as I approached. It seems some of you fear the direction Henry is giving the company." He adjusted in his chair, leaning slightly forward. "Let me tell you a story. When Anthony Vanderbilt, my father, founded this jewelry store in partnership with Edward Davis, Henry's grandfather, the world was different. Luxury was defined by exclusivity, by the inaccessible. We created jewelry for the elite, only the elite, and we prided ourselves on that." He paused, his eyes finding Emily's. "But my father had a vision that went beyond precious stones and noble metals. He believed that each jewel told a story, of the land where the materials came from, of the artisans who shaped it, of the person who would wear it. For him, true luxury was in the meaning." Teresa shifted, impatient. "Uncle Alfred, with all due respect, times have changed. The market is more competitive, consumers more fickle." "Exactly, my dear," interrupted Alfred, surprising everyone with the firmness in his elderly voice. "Times have changed, and we must change with them or perish, like so many other traditional brands that refuse to evolve." He turned to Henry. "What my grandnephew proposes is not a break with our tradition. It's a return to the original essence of Davis and Vanderbilt. Jewelry with meaning, pieces that tell stories. The difference is that now these stories include people like my great-grandniece Emily, whose journey represents the reality of so many American women." A reflective silence fell over the room. Finally, Charles Baptist, the oldest board member, cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he began, hesitant, "perhaps we have been hasty in our judgment. The numbers are indeed impressive. And Mr. Vanderbilt raises valid points about the essence of the brand." Other board members began to nod, the atmosphere in the room visibly changing. Teresa remained rigid in her chair, but clearly losing support. "I propose a vote," finally said Ricardo Mendez, one of the youngest board members, "to reaffirm our confidence in Henry Davis's leadership and in the current strategic direction of the company." The vote was quick and decisive. 10 votes in favor, 2 against. Teresa and a close ally. When the meeting was formally adjourned, Emily felt as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Henry approached, his eyes shining with contained emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, discreetly squeezing her hand, "for everything." In the weeks that followed, the changes initiated by the Legacy Project gained momentum. The first unit of the Eleanor Vanderbilt Foundation was inaugurated in Riverside Heights, exactly where Emily had lived. The center, modern and welcoming, offered everything from basic necessities to professional courses and psychological support for mothers in vulnerable situations. Brian Smith, surprisingly, accepted the agreement proposed by Emily. The supervised visits began timidly, with Ryan initially wary of the stranger who presented himself as his father. But with time, a cautious relationship began to develop, not the instant bond that Brian had imagined, but something that could, eventually, grow into something meaningful. The relationship between Emily and Henry flourished, slowly and carefully. Both carried scars from past experiences. Both had fears. But they also shared a vision, a purpose that went beyond their personal feelings. The Legacy Project expanded to a second collection, this time inspired by stories of women served by the foundation, artisans, entrepreneurs, mothers who overcame immense obstacles. On a sunny Sunday afternoon, 6 months after the fateful board meeting, Emily, Henry, Alfred, and little Ryan, who was now taking his first wobbly steps, strolled through the gardens of the Vanderbilt mansion. Alfred, seated on a bench under a century-old oak tree, watched the boy run after a butterfly, laughing uncontrollably. "He has her eyes," commented the elderly man, a nostalgic smile on his wrinkled face. "The same eyes as Eleanor." Emily sat beside him, following his gaze. "I wish she could see this, see how her story continued, even after everything." "She sees," Alfred replied, with the serenity of the very elderly. "Through you, through him. Vanderbilt blood runs in your veins, but it's more than that. It's the spirit, the strength she had." Henry approached, gently holding Ryan, who had tired of the game. "I found something interesting in the company archives," he said, sitting beside Emily with the boy in his lap. "An entry from 1975 about a woman who tried to sell an old ring at our branch in Boston. The description matches Eleanor's ring." "My grandmother," murmured Emily, feeling a tightness in her chest. "She must have tried to sell it when they went through difficulties." "But she didn't sell it," continued Henry. "The record says she gave up at the last moment, saying the ring was the last connection to who she really was. The manager at the time offered a considerable amount, but she refused." "She knew," concluded Alfred, his eyes watering. "She knew that one day the ring would find its way back, that it would complete the circle." Emily looked at her son, at Henry, at the elderly man who had become a father figure in her life. She thought about the entire journey, from absolute despair that morning on Fifth Avenue to this moment of fullness. The ring that had changed everything had been just the catalyst. The true treasure was in the restored connections, in the bridges built between past and future. "I think the true legacy isn't the jewelry, not even the name," she reflected, watching Ryan fall asleep comfortably in Henry's arms. "It's the choices we make, the stories we create, the lives we touch." Henry extended his free hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. "And the story we're just beginning to write," he completed, his gaze full of promises for the future. In that perfect moment, under the sun filtered through the oak leaves, Emily finally felt at peace. The ring that had begun as her last resort had revealed itself to be much more, a portal to her true destiny, a symbol of rebirth not just for her, but for everyone around her. And so, the circle was completed, not with an end, but with a new beginning. Dear listeners, we hope that Emily Anderson's journey has touched your hearts. From despair on the streets of New York to the rediscovery of her roots, her story reminds us that our true legacy lies in the lives we touch and the choices we make. To continue being moved by equally captivating narratives, we've prepared a special playlist with stories that explore family ties, secrets of the past, and inspiring new beginnings. Find it here on the left side of the screen. If this story awakened emotions in you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on this video. Every day we bring new stories that explore the complexity of American life in its multiple facets. Share in the comments which moment of Emily's journey touched your heart the most. We're eager to read your impressions and continue this conversation with you.